You won't believe what my own granddaughter did to me. After all the sacrifices I made, the late nights comforting her through heartbreak, the thousands of dollars I poured into making her big day perfect, she called me basic. And that was just the start. Before I share the rest, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and drop a comment to tell me where you're watching from. Trust me, this story is going to stick with you. I never thought I'd end up cast as the villain in my own family's tale. But I guess these things don't happen all at once. They sneak up on you. One little dismissal here, one thankless gesture there, one call that never came. Still, nothing prepared me for Madison, my first granddaughter, the same little girl I used to rock to sleep on my chest, looking me dead in the eye and calling me too basic for her bridal shower. But here's the kicker. She didn't say it to my face. Oh no, that would have taken guts. She said it in a group text I was accidentally included in. They were going over the final details of the bridal shower, the one I was paying for, mind you, straight out of my retirement account. I had spared no expense, custom linen napkins embroidered with her monogram, a floral arch flown in from Savannah, and a gorgeous vineyard venue nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And yet, in that message thread, there she was laughing. Can we make sure Grandma doesn't show up in one of her usual Kohl's outfits? This vibe is luxury, not basic. Another message chimed in, probably one of her sorority friends. Ugh, yes, she gives me cafeteria lady energy. And then, heartbreakingly, a third message came from my own daughter, Claire. Let's just tell her we're keeping it small. She'll understand. I remember sitting there, hands trembling as I read those words. At first, I thought I must have misunderstood. Maybe it was meant for another chat. Maybe it was autocorrect. But no. There was my name, right there in black and white. And there was their casual cruelty. I sat alone in my quiet kitchen for a long time. The tea kettle on the stove whistled and whistled before I even remembered I'd put it on. But I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I smiled. A strange, hollow smile I barely recognized. Wish you all the best, darling, I typed back. Hope it's everything you dreamed. Then I picked up the phone and called the venue. Hi, this is Eleanor McCarthy, I said, my voice steady and sweet as pie. I'd like to cancel the reservation for June 14th. No reschedule. Just cancel. Thank you kindly. The woman on the line was shocked. She offered to waive the cancellation fee, but I told her not to worry. I already had other plans for that money. That night, I carefully packed up all the guest favors into a box marked for donation. I transferred the full refund into my charity account and sent it all to a local women's shelter along with a note, in honor of all the women who've been told they're too basic to belong. I didn't tell a single soul. And when the morning of the shower arrived, the sun was shining and the breeze was soft, and I felt free that I sat quietly across the street from the now empty venue, sipping iced tea from a thermos while watching the chaos unfold like a scene from a play. One car after another pulled into the lot. Heels clattered across the pavement, pastel dresses swished in the breeze, and then came the panic. Phones were whipped out. Hands tugged at locked doors. I could hear the angry tones of guests making frantic calls. And then I heard her, Madison. I recognized her voice before I even saw her. What do you mean it's canceled? My grandma booked this. Call her. She sounded frantic, her voice sharp with embarrassment. I saw her face flush bright red under the afternoon sun, her hands gesturing wildly as she scrambled for answers. I watched the scene for another quiet moment, then stood up, brushed off my skirt, and walked away. Maybe I should have felt guilty. Maybe a kinder woman, a softer woman, would have. But me? I felt only a deep, quiet peace, the kind that comes when you finally stop holding your breath after years spent underwater. Later that week, the phone calls began. Claire, my daughter, was the first. Mom, what happened at the shower? She asked carefully. I wouldn't know, I replied, calmly folding a pile of laundry. I wasn't invited. There was a long, tense pause. You didn't have to cancel it. But I did, I answered softly. It was mine to cancel. There wasn't much said after that. Just the silence, awkward, brittle, sharp like broken glass. I didn't expect an apology. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But word spread around town anyway. People started whispering. Eleanor McCarthy, the kind widow who donates turkeys every Thanksgiving? She canceled her own granddaughter's bridal shower. It was funny in a sad sort of way. Nobody had ever asked why I gave so much, why I sat alone in the back pew at church, why my family never included me in their social media posts, even when I was standing 2 feet away. They only noticed when I finally pushed back. That week, I began a journal. Not just to record what had happened, but to empty out the things I'd been carrying for decades, the marriage, the betrayals, the family secrets I had clutched like burning coals, searing my palms year after year. Each night, I poured pieces of myself onto those pages. I didn't yet know what I would do with them. I only knew one thing. It was time to stop pretending. I had been quiet for too long, and something deep inside me, something fierce, something alive, was waking up. The next chapter of my life had already begun, and I had no idea just how explosive it would be. The knock came just after sunset. At first, I thought it might be one of the neighbors, maybe Martha from across the street, bringing over her blackberry cobbler the way she always did when she sensed something was off. But when I opened the door, it wasn't Martha. Standing on my porch was a young woman, maybe in her early 30s, thin and wide-eyed, with a dusty canvas backpack slung over one shoulder and a camera bag in the other. "Mrs. McCarthy?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. "Yes," I replied cautiously, keeping the screen door closed. I'd learned to be careful, especially with strangers who knew my name. "My name's Lily," she said, shifting nervously. I'm working on a documentary project about women like you." I raised an eyebrow. "Women like me?" She flushed slightly, flustered. "I mean, women over 60 who've, well, been erased. By their families, by the system. Women who gave and then were pushed aside. I've been traveling across the South collecting their stories." My breath caught in my throat. "A woman at the shelter in Charlotte gave me your name," Lily continued. "She said you saved her life. Mary Ann." It had been years, but I remembered her instantly. A woman who had arrived at the shelter with a baby on her hip and bruises blooming up her arms like purple violets. I had held her hand that night, told her she was strong enough to start over. I hadn't heard from her since. Slowly, I unlatched the door. "Come in, Lily." We sat together at my kitchen table, the old floral vinyl tablecloth spread between us, sipping lemon tea as she gently set up her recorder. She didn't push, didn't pry. She simply waited, patient, as if she knew I needed time. And when I was ready, I told her everything, the first time he lied to me, how it started with little things, like working late or forgetting anniversaries, and slowly turned into something darker. I remembered the hotel key I once found in his suit pocket, and how, when I asked him about it, he had simply laughed in my face. "Don't be so dramatic, Ellie," he'd said, shaking his head. "You always make something out of nothing." But I knew the truth. And now, finally, I was ready to speak it. I told her about the night I finally left. It wasn't dramatic, no slamming doors, no shouting or fury. Just quiet, steady resolve. I packed a single suitcase, slipped off my wedding ring, and left it on the dresser. He didn't stop me. Not once. Lily listened like every word I spoke mattered. "You were married for 35 years, she asked gently. 35 years, I nodded. 3 kids, and a lifetime of being invisible. Her eyes glistened with tears. And then, without meaning to, I asked her something I hadn't expected to. "Why are you really here, Lily?" She blinked, surprised. "I told you, the documentary." "No," I said softly, leaning forward across the table. "You knew my name. My full name. You didn't just get that from Mary Ann." Lily's eyes dropped to her tea. I saw her fingers tremble slightly as she held the cup. I'm her daughter," she whispered. "Mary Ann's." I felt the air leave my lungs. "You held me when I was a baby," she said quietly. "I don't remember it, of course, but she does. She said you gave her the strength to leave. My father said you were the reason she survived." I felt a tightness in my throat I couldn't swallow away. "I wanted to find you," Lily continued, her voice breaking. "I want to say thank you. And I want to help you tell your story." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My hand reached across the table instinctively, wrapping gently around hers. "You already are, sweetheart," I whispered. In the days that followed, Lily and I became fast companions. She stayed in the guest room, set up her camera gear around the house, in the garden, on the porch, in the kitchen where so many battles had once been fought and lost. She helped me scan old letters, organize faded photos, dig up court documents I'd buried deep in drawers and tried to forget. But more than that, she helped me remember who I was. Not just a wife, not just a mother, not just a grandmother, but Eleanor. Eleanor, the girl who loved poetry, who once dreamed of becoming a teacher, who danced barefoot in the rain at 21, who kissed her high school sweetheart in the back of a red Ford pickup. That girl was still in there somewhere. And Lily, she reminded me my story wasn't over yet. One night, Lily came downstairs with a spark in her eyes. "I want to host a dinner," she said excitedly. "Invite your family. Pretend it's for the documentary. We'll call it a celebration of the McCarthy legacy. They'll come for the cameras, and then you'll have the floor." I stared at her, unsure. "You want me to confront them?" "No," she said softly. "I want you to reclaim your voice." Something inside me trembled. Fear, maybe, or just the weight of old habits. But I was tired of shrinking, tired of folding myself into corners, tired of pretending their coldness didn't cut deep. So I nodded. "Let's do it." Lily threw herself into the planning. She was fierce, organized, determined. She rented a beautiful private room at a historic inn just outside town, printed elegant invitations with gold foil letters, even hired a photographer. Everyone thought it was about them, about their legacy. Little did they know. As the date drew closer, old ghosts stirred in my chest. What if they laughed at me? What if they walked out? What if they twisted everything, the way they always had? But then I remembered something Lily had said the very first night she arrived. You don't need their permission to matter. And just like that, the fear melted away. I was ready to speak, ready to burn it all down if I had to. Maybe, just maybe, ready to rise from the ashes. The inn was nestled beneath sweeping willow trees, strung with soft golden lights, like something lifted from the pages of Southern living. It was the kind of place where memories hung in the air like sweet perfume. I'd attended weddings there, baby showers, even an anniversary party decades ago, back when my children still saw me as someone worth celebrating. Now, I stood in the grand dining room, watching as the staff placed delicate name cards along the long mahogany table. My heart thudded against my ribs, loud and urgent, like it wanted to break free. In the corner, Lily adjusted her camera equipment, dressed sharply in a sleek black blazer, every bit the polished, professional producer. She glanced up and gave me a little encouraging nod. And just like that, I was ready. "This is your stage, Eleanor." I smoothed the fabric of my navy dress with trembling hands. It was the same dress I'd worn to Madison's high school graduation. I could still hear her voice from back then, telling me I looked elegant. She hadn't called me that in years. The guests arrived in small clusters. Claire, my daughter, came in first, dressed in her usual polished perfection. Pearl earrings, a delicate silk scarf, and that signature smile that never quite touched her eyes. Her husband trailed behind, his attention buried in his phone. Madison floated in next, laughing too loudly, arm in arm with her fiancé, Evan. She was radiant, I'll give her that. Her long blonde waves, flawless makeup, and that designer dress all screamed youth and money. She glanced around the room, puzzled. "Wait, this isn't a restaurant," she asked, blinking at the elegant setup. "We rented the room privately for the documentary," Lily answered smoothly, her producer voice calm and confident. "It's a tribute to the McCarthy family matriarch, a film dinner to preserve the family legacy." That got their attention. "Oh, how lovely," Claire chimed, immediately slipping into hostess mode. "Well, we're honored, aren't we, Maddie?" Madison offered a tight-lipped smile. "Of course." One by one, the others trickled in. My two sons, one with his second wife, the other arriving alone and brooding. A few cousins, old friends, all of them smiling, polite, unaware. We settled at the table. Plates clinked softly, wine flowed generously, and the conversation danced lightly on the surface. Easy, meaningless chatter. Claire kept subtly angling herself toward the camera every time she spoke, as if she were born for the lens. And then, from across the room, Lily gave me the signal. I rose slowly to my feet. I want to thank you all for coming tonight, I began, my voice softer than I had planned. This means a great deal to me. Heads turned, expressions curious. For years, I continued, steadying my breath. I've played a part in this family, a part one never auditioned for. I was the quiet one, the provider, the one who stayed behind and made sure there were casseroles in the freezer and Christmas cards mailed on time. I felt my chest tighten, but I pushed forward. But I was also the one forgotten, silenced, discarded. And lately I've begun to wonder if a woman gives everything she has to the people she loves and they no longer remember who she is, did she ever really exist to them at all? The room felt utterly still. Even the forks stopped moving. Claire let out a nervous little laugh. Mom, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the bridal shower. Madison stiffened. I paid for everything, I said, turning to face her. The flowers, the food, the venue. I wanted it to be perfect for you. And in return, I was called basic, embarrassing, someone to be excluded. Grandma, that was a private message. Madison rushed to explain, her cheeks flushing red. But it wasn't private to me. I read every word. And yes, I canceled the shower, not out of spite, but out of clarity. For the first time, I saw how invisible I'd become. Silence. One of my sons cleared his throat awkwardly. I'm sure she didn't mean it, Mom. Didn't mean it. I repeated, my voice now stronger, the fire rising in my chest. What about the years your father cheated on me, and I kept the family together? What about the holidays you left me alone because your new wives didn't like my casseroles? What about when I had surgery and not a single one of you called to check on me for 5 days? The room felt tight, suffocating. I stayed silent all these years to protect your image of a perfect family. But I'm done protecting you. I turned to Lily, who lifted a manila envelope from her bag. In here, I said, my voice steady, are copies of every letter I wrote to your father during the divorce. The ones where I begged him not to turn you against me. The ones where I warned what it would do to our children. I reached into my handbag and pulled out another folder. Our photos, the bruises, the empty bank accounts, the things I had survived while still smiling through birthday parties and graduations, sat stacked on the table, undeniable. Madison was crying now, tears streaking her flawless makeup. Claire looked pale, like she might faint. I didn't invite you here to destroy you, I said softly, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. I invited you here to free myself. I sat down slowly. My hands were still shaking. But inside, I felt lighter, as if I'd just set down a burden I'd carried on my shoulders for 40 years. No one said a word, not until Lily quietly turned off the camera. Madison was the first to rise. Her voice cracked as she spoke. I didn't know, Grandma, she whispered. I swear I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said, looking at her gently. But now you do. The dinner ended early. There were no toasts, no more light conversation. They left in waves, quiet, subdued, eyes downcast. A few kissed my cheek on the way out. Most didn't. Lily stayed behind to help me clean up. Her eyes shimmered with emotion as she placed the last plate in the sink. You were incredible, she whispered. I was honest, I corrected gently. She smiled softly. Same thing. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. I had told the truth. I had broken the silence. But I could feel it. Something else was stirring inside me. Something even deeper, something buried. And I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The next morning, I woke to the shrill ring of the phone and the dull ache of a storm pressing behind my eyes. The screen lit up, Claire. Her name glowed like a warning sign. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I picked up. Hello, Mom, she said, her voice brittle. We need to talk about that performance last night. That stunt. I sat up slowly, easing my back against the headboard. You mean the truth? I asked calmly. She let out a long sigh. You humiliated us on camera. Do you even realize what you've done to this family? I closed my eyes for a long moment. What I've done, Claire? I said softly. I didn't destroy this family. I just stopped pretending it was perfect. There was a pause on the line, then a soft click. She hung up. I set the phone down on the nightstand and gazed out the window. The sky was heavy, gray, pregnant with rain. But I wasn't afraid of storms anymore. Later that afternoon, Lily returned from a short trip into town, her cheeks flushed pink from the cold, her arms full of boxes. "What's all this?" I asked, puzzled. She set the boxes on the dining table and lifted the lid. Inside were neat stacks of manila folders, legal documents, old bank statements, and, sitting right on top, a letter addressed to me in handwriting I knew by heart. "I went to the county archives," Lily explained softly, "and I found something." She handed me the letter. It was dated May years ago. My mother's handwriting. "Dear Eleanor, I've changed my will. The farm is yours now. I know I should have done this years ago, but I couldn't bear to hurt your brother. Still, it's rightfully yours. You were the one who stayed. You were the one who sacrificed." My throat tightened painfully. I remembered that letter. I'd found it after my mother's funeral, tucked inside the pages of her Bible. I'd given it to my ex-husband, Charles, to pass to the lawyer. He told me it wouldn't hold up. He told me not to fight. And I believed him. "Turns out," Lily said carefully, "he never submitted it. He buried it. Legally, the will is still valid." She met my eyes. "The land, Eleanor. The farm. It's yours." I stared at her, stunned. "What?" I whispered. "It's yours," she repeated softly. "We just have to challenge the transfer. I've already lined up a lawyer. You have a real case." My heart pounded in my chest. That farm wasn't just land. It was legacy. It was where I was born, where my father taught me to fish, where my mother baked apple pies every 4th of July. It was mine. And Charles had stolen it with a signature and a lie. I stood up so fast the chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Call the lawyer," I said, fire igniting in my chest. "Let's bring it all into the light." The process began that same week, and oh, how quickly the storm gathered. My ex-husband, Dr. Charles McCarthy, was furious that he called me personally, something he hadn't done in years. "Eleanor, don't do this," Charles snapped, his voice sharp, urgent. "You'll embarrass the family. Think of the kids." "The kids you turned against me," I answered calmly. His silence on the other end was answer enough. "You stole from me," I continued quietly. "You made me feel small for decades. And now I'm taking it back." "You don't know what you're starting," he hissed. I smiled softly to myself. "Oh, Charlie, I do. For the first time in my life, I do." The court proceedings began within the month. Lily and I worked tirelessly, poring over old files, digging through every drawer, every box, every dusty cabinet for any scrap of evidence we could find. She even unearthed an old voicemail where Charles admitted the will had been misplaced. The courtroom was cold and formal, its walls humming with tension. Claire sat stiffly in the gallery, arms crossed tightly over her chest, eyes dark and unreadable. Madison didn't come. Charles, sitting at his attorney's table, looked older now, thinner, not the charming doctor everyone once adored, but a bitter man weighed down by pride and stripped of shame. My lawyer, bless her fierce heart, was a powerhouse. She laid everything out in careful order. The will, the timeline, the years of silence that followed. Then she placed the letter from my mother, the one Lily had miraculously recovered, into the judge's hands. The judge read it slowly, his brow furrowed. Then he lifted his gaze and looked directly at me. "Mrs. McCarthy," he said, voice measured, "do you believe your late mother intended this farm to be yours?" I rose to my feet, heart pounding. "I don't just believe it," I said clearly, "I know it. And I would have fought for it if I hadn't been gaslit into thinking I didn't matter. But I do matter, and I'm not invisible anymore." The room fell hushed. Then, slowly, the judge nodded. "I find in favor of the petitioner." The gavel fell. Just like that, the farm was mine. Lily squeezed my hand so tightly I thought it might break, but I didn't care. I was laughing, crying, breathing in a way I hadn't in years. Outside the courthouse, a cluster of reporters waited. I offered a single statement. "I'm not here to ruin reputations," I said firmly. "I'm here to reclaim mine." Then I walked away, head high, spine straight, heart light. It wasn't just about land. It was about truth. And it was only the beginning. 2 weeks later, I stood at the edge of my mother's old farm. my boots sinking gently into the soft, thawing earth. The house looked tired, its shutters sagged, the paint peeled. Weeds choked what had once been a tidy garden. But to me, it was sacred ground. It was the heartbeat I thought I'd lost. I breathed it all in. The smell of wild honeysuckle, the damp scent of pine, the sharp tang of old memories. I walked the length of the property line, remembering summers chasing fireflies with my brothers, winters huddled by the fire while Mama read aloud, her voice slow and syrupy sweet. I remembered the barn dances, the burnt pies, the late night tears. I remembered everything. And for the first time in decades, I felt whole. The next morning, Lily arrived, cheeks flushed from the cold, notepad full of scribbled ideas, a bright sparkle in her eyes. "We could restore it," she said excitedly. "Turn the house into a women's retreat center, workshops, healing spaces, a place where women like you, women like me, can come to breathe." I hadn't even finished my coffee when she spread sketches across the kitchen table. "I was just planning to fix the porch swing," I joked. But something about her idea stirred something deep inside me. A safe place, a fresh start, not just for me, but for all the invisible women I'd met over the years. The ones whose stories were never told. The ones who were always someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's shadow. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. "Let's do it," I said quietly. We started small, gutting the inside, replacing windows, repainting the trim. Neighbors pitched in, old friends brought tools and casseroles. Even the mayor stopped by one afternoon, smiling. "It's good to see this place come alive again," he said. And it was. So was I. But just as the house began to shine, the phone rang again. It was Madison. Her voice cracked before she even said hello. "Grandma, can I come see you?" I paused for a moment, unsure, then softly said, "Yes, of course." She arrived 2 days later, dressed in jeans and a hoodie, no makeup, her hair pulled back in a loose bun. Not the polished, picture-perfect version of herself I was used to seeing, but just a girl, my granddaughter. Madison stood on the porch where I used to rock her to sleep, her hands trembling slightly, her face filled with nerves. "Grandma," she began, her voice shaking, "I didn't understand not about what you went through, or what you carried. I was cruel, and I'm so sorry." Tears welled in her eyes as she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small frame. Inside it was a printed copy of the infamous message thread, the one where she had called me basic. But this time she had changed it. The frame was painted gold, and beneath the glass she had written I was wrong. "You're not basic. You're the foundation, and I'm proud to be your granddaughter." My chest ached with emotion. I reached out, pulling her into my arms. "Thank you," I whispered. "That means more than you know." Madison stayed for days after that. She helped with the cleanup around the farm, cooked meals with me, asked thoughtful questions, real ones about my childhood, my marriage, my dreams, my losses. And I told her, not as a grandmother, not as a victim, but as Eleanor. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the fields, we stood together under the old oak tree, the same tree where Mama used to tie ribbons every spring. Madison looked up at me, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Grandma," she said softly, "I've been thinking maybe I don't want the big wedding, the glitz, the show." "Oh," I asked, smiling gently. She nodded slowly. "Maybe I just want this. Family, truth, a chance to do it right." I said nothing, just reached out and took her hand in mine. That night, long after everyone had gone to bed, I found myself dancing alone in the living room. Jazz played softly from the old radio, and when At Last by Etta James came on, I swayed slowly under the dim light, arms outstretched, tears falling freely, because at last I was seen. At last I was whole. At last I was me. And somewhere in the soft hum of the music and the flicker of candlelight, I knew. This was just the beginning. The best was still to come. The morning of the wedding arrived with the scent of freshly cut grass and magnolia blossoms. But there was no grand church, no cathedral, no string quartet tucked into some stuffy hall. Instead, the farm had come alive, blooming in every corner. We transformed the space behind the old barn into a garden chapel, draped with linen and wildflowers, where sunlight streamed through the trees like God himself had blessed the ground. The oak tree, Mama's ribbon tree, stood tall, proud, now wrapped in white silk and shimmering memories. Madison had asked to hold her wedding here. Simple, intimate, true. There were no diamond-studded centerpieces, no rented swans, no influencers pretending to care. Just family, real family, and redemption blooming in the most unexpected soil. Guests began arriving around noon. Neighbors, old friends, folks from town who hadn't seen the farm look this alive since the summer of long ago. There was laughter, hugs, soft music drifting through the air. I stood at the edge of the porch, watching them gather in their white chairs on the lawn. Beside me, Lily stood proudly, camera in hand, her eyes shining. "You ready for this?" she asked with a grin. I nodded. I've never been more ready. Just before the ceremony, a courier arrived, holding a thin envelope, handwritten, no return address. I opened it slowly, uncertain. Inside was a letter. From Charles. "Eleanor, you were right. I never saw you for who you were. I saw a version I could control. And when you stopped being that, I resented you. I know it's too late for forgiveness, but it's not too late for the truth. I'm stepping away from the practice. I've sold my share. Enclosed is a check. It's not enough. It never will be, but it's something. I've told the kids everything. Do with it what you will." My hands trembled slightly as I held the letter. But my heart, it stood tall. Inside Charles's envelope was a check for the sons. I stared at it, not for the amount, but for what it meant. It wasn't about justice. It wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition. I didn't tell anyone. Not that day, not yet. I quietly slipped the letter into my Bible, right between the pages where Mama had once hidden her will. Two women, both betrayed, both redeemed. The music began, and I took my seat near the front, my heart so full it ached. Then Madison appeared at the top of the aisle. She was barefoot, no veil, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. She paused, locked eyes with me, really looked at me, not past me or around me, and she mouthed, "Thank you." Tears slid down my cheeks as I watched her walk down the aisle toward Evan, who waited with shaking hands and wide, love-filled eyes. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, raw, tender words about trust, forgiveness, and humility. Madison spoke of generational healing, how the wounds we inherit don't have to define us, but they do demand our attention. And then right there, in front of everyone, she spoke my name. I dedicate this day to my grandmother, Eleanor McCarthy, for showing me that dignity isn't about appearances. It's about truth. And that love doesn't come from perfection, it comes from courage. The crowd rose to their feet in applause before the couple even kissed. After the ceremony, Lily handed me a small envelope. "What's this?" I asked, surprised. "It's from the State Film Commission," she smiled. "They want to fund the full documentary. They love the footage. They want to call it Basic No More, the story of Eleanor McCarthy." I laughed, tears shining in my eyes. I couldn't have written a better ending. That night, we danced under the stars, me, Madison, Lily, even Claire, who wept as she hugged me tight and whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't see you sooner." We didn't talk about the past that night. We didn't have to. It was already there, folded into the soil. The music, the laughter echoing across the farm from people who had once looked past me, now circling back, drawn like fireflies to the light. And as the night faded, I sat in my old rocking chair on the porch, watching the last of the candles flicker out. 66 years. A lifetime of silence. But not anymore. I was Eleanor McCarthy, and I had finally been heard. 2 months later, the ribbons returned. We started tying them again, me and Madison, just like Mama used to do every spring. But this time, each ribbon carried a name, a woman we'd helped, a life we'd touched. There was Angela, who came from 3 towns over, fleeing a husband who'd spent years making her feel worthless. There was Margot, 72 years old, who had never learned to drive because her late husband said she wasn't smart enough. There was Jenny, just 24, whose mother had cast her out simply for speaking her truth. They came to the farm with nothing but stories, and they left with something more: dignity. We called it the Ribbon House. A place for women to write new chapters, no matter their age, their wounds, or the silence they'd endured. Lily managed the outreach. Madison handled the grant applications. And me, I welcomed each woman at the gate, every single time, with the same words. You belong here. One golden afternoon, while Madison knelt near the porch, planting lavender, she looked up at me. Grandma, do you ever wish things had gone differently? She asked softly. I gazed out over the fields, bathed in late light. I used to, I admitted. But if they had, I might never have found my voice. And you might never have found yours. She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. I'm proud to be your granddaughter. Tears stung my eyes. And I whispered, am proud to be your legacy. That night, I found Lily sitting quietly under the oak tree, camera in her lap, staring up at the stars. She looked peaceful, tired, fulfilled. They accepted the documentary into Sundance, she said softly, smiling. We're going. All of us. My heart skipped a beat. The best, I realized, was still to come. It wasn't about the prestige. It was about knowing that my story, our story, would reach women far beyond these fields. Women still sitting in silence, still believing they were too old, too plain, too broken to rise again. They're going to hear your voice, Eleanor, Lily whispered, her eyes shining. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. They're going to hear yours, too. On the morning of the premiere, I stood in front of the mirror in a modest hotel room in Utah, smoothing down my navy blue suit, fastening Mama's old pearl necklace around my neck. My heart held every version of myself I'd ever been. Young, scared, silenced, and finally, free. We walked the red carpet together, a proud trio. Lily, Madison, and me. Cameras flashed. People clapped, but my thoughts were back home, with the ribbon swaying gently on the oak tree. The film played in a packed theater. There were tears, long applause, a standing ovation. But the moment that stayed with me forever came during the Q&A session, when an older woman with silver curls and trembling hands stood up at the back of the room. I haven't spoken to my daughter in 20 years, she said, her voice breaking. But tonight, I think I will. Our eyes met across the theater, and I knew this was the reason. This was the miracle born from decades of heartache. This was redemption. When we returned to the farm, I found a letter waiting on the porch swing. There was no signature, just 6 words in delicate, careful handwriting. I see you now. I'm sorry. I pressed the letter to my chest, smiling through fresh tears, because I was no longer waiting to be seen. I had already become the woman I needed, and now I was helping others do the same. That night, I tied one last ribbon on the oak tree, bright red, the color of fire, of courage, of rebirth. On it, I wrote, Eleanor McCarthy, survivor, matriarch, free. Then I turned toward the house, toward the laughter inside, toward the life still unfolding. And I walked forward, finally whole, finally heard, finally home. 1 year later, to the very day, the farm buzzed with life. Children chased chickens across the yard. Women gathered around fire pits, their laughter floating into the evening air. From the porch, the soft sound of old gospel hymns spilled out, carried on the wind. The ribbon house had become something none of us could have imagined, a living, breathing sanctuary. Not just a home, but a movement. There were now 4 cabins on the property, each one built by local volunteers. A greenhouse, a craft barn, and a beautiful circular space we called the voice room, where women could sit, share, and finally say the things they had never dared speak before. I had never seen so many broken pieces come together to create something so whole. And yet, each evening as I walked through the fields at sunset, the silence gave me pause. Because despite everything, despite the film, the farm, the forgiveness, I still hadn't spoken to Claire. Not since the wedding. Not since she had quietly walked away, too ashamed or too afraid to come back. Until one evening, I was locking up the community pantry when a familiar car pulled into the driveway. My heart caught in my chest as Claire stepped out. No designer scarf, no polished pearls, just jeans, a windbreaker, and a look on her face I hadn't seen in decades. Vulnerability. She didn't speak right away. She just stood there looking around, taking in the land she'd grown up on and forgotten. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. I swallowed hard, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "Hi, Claire." She stepped closer, her hands trembling. "I watched the documentary twice, maybe 3 times, she admitted, her voice cracking. I couldn't believe what I didn't see, what I refused to see. My voice stayed gentle. "You were a child, Claire." "No," she shook her head. "I was an adult. I had children of my own. And I chose convenience over truth." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded, aged photograph. It was me, holding baby Claire in front of the old farmhouse. I was smiling, radiant, tired, alive. "You were everything I needed," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "And I let him take that from you. I let us take it from you." Tears blurred my vision as I reached for her hand. "You can't change the past, baby," I said softly. "But you're here now." And that I knew was everything. She nodded through her tears. "Do you think I could volunteer here? Maybe help in the kitchen? I can cook." Without a word, I pulled her into my arms, burying my face in her shoulder the same way I used to when she was 5 and afraid of thunderstorms. "You don't have to ask," I whispered. "This is your home, too." That night, we sat on the porch under a sky full of stars, shoulder to shoulder. Not as a mother and daughter caught in the wreckage of old wounds, but as 2 women mending from the inside out. Inside, Madison rocked her newborn gently by the fireplace, my first great-grandchild, a boy. She'd named him Elliot after me. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, reading submissions for her new podcast, Letters from the Ribbon House. Stories from across the country had started pouring in. Women sharing their truths, their survival, because they'd seen that someone else, someone like them, had survived, too. And outside, the oak tree stood tall beneath the silver moonlight, its branches heavy with ribbons, some faded and old, some new and bright, but all sacred. I closed my eyes, listening to the wind rustle the leaves, and for the first time in my life, I felt something I couldn't quite name at first. And then I knew. It was peace, the kind that only comes when you've told the whole truth, survived the storm, and lived to dance again. As the fireflies blinked softly back to life around us, I whispered to myself, I was never too basic. I was just too much woman for people who couldn't see me. But now they do. 5 years had passed since I tied the first ribbon. 5 years since the farm had been nothing more than overgrown grass and a broken porch swing. And I'd been something like that too. But standing there now, watching families scatter across the lawn, watching the sunlight glint off silver hair and children's laughter weave through the breeze, I knew one thing for certain. Every moment of silence, every cracked heart, every slammed door had led to this. I had just returned from Washington, D.C., of all places. The Ribbon House Initiative had been honored with a national award for community healing. Lily had spoken on stage, tears streaming down her cheeks. Madison sat beside her, baby Elliot perched proudly on her hip. And me, I stood just behind them, my hand over my heart, never prouder in my life. When we came home, the entire town welcomed us back with banners, pies, and more hugs than I could count. The local paper called it the redemption of Eleanor McCarthy. But here's the truth. I wasn't looking for redemption anymore. I was looking for legacy. One quiet afternoon, I walked out to the oak tree, the oldest on the farm. The wind was soft, the air thick with the sweet scent of jasmine. As I touched one of the ribbons, a thought struck me like a spark. I didn't just want to leave behind memory. I wanted to leave behind voice, to give shape and sound to every Eleanor who had ever lived in the shadows. So I began writing my book. I called it Ribbons in the Wind, How I Took My Life Back. The words poured out of me like a river breaking loose. Decades of silence reshaped into strength. I wrote about Charles, about Claire, about the lies, the betrayals, and the long years of loss. But I also wrote about the moment I stopped waiting for permission to be seen. And I wrote about joy. About Elliot's first birthday when he wrapped his tiny arms around my neck and whispered Shiji. About Madison standing tall at a women's conference saying, my grandmother's fire saved us all. About Claire standing before a group of survivors at the farm, sharing her own story of healing, voice shaking, finally free. When the book hit shelves the following spring, it became a quiet bestseller. But more importantly, it became a lifeline. Letters flooded in from Kansas, New Mexico, Ohio. Women in their 60s, 70s, even 90s, telling me they'd walked out of bad marriages, reconnected with estranged children, started painting again, started living again. One woman wrote, "Your story didn't just change my life. It gave it back to me." I kept each letter that arrived in a special box I called my second chances drawer. Then, one crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves swirled and danced across the porch, there was a knock at the door. It was Charles, older now, stooped slightly, his once proud shoulders softened by time. In his hands, he held a simple bouquet of white lilies. "I know I don't deserve a minute of your time," he said, his voice trembling, eyes glistening with unspoken regret. "But I wanted to tell you in person. I was wrong about everything." I looked into his eyes and, for a brief moment, saw both the man I had once loved and the man who had failed me. "Both," I said softly. "I forgave you a long time ago. But I'll never forget what you taught me." He blinked, eyes misty. "And what was that?" "That I never needed anyone's permission to matter." He placed the lilies gently in my hands. "Goodbye, Eleanor. Goodbye, Charles." I watched him walk away, not with bitterness, not with resentment, but with something far more powerful, closure. That night, beneath the stars, I sat beside Lily, Madison, and little Elliot. Together, we tied one final ribbon to the great oak tree. It was bright white, the color of truth. On it I had written, "She rose in silence, and the world finally listened." I smiled at them, this family we had built from brokenness and light, and I knew, not every story ends in tragedy. Some end in triumph. Mine did. I hadn't just been heard. I had been honored. They once called me too basic. Now, they call me legendary. The day I turned 72, the sky opened up with a soft, golden rain, the kind that feels less like weather and more like a blessing. Of course, Madison insisted on throwing a party. Long tables stretched across the front lawn of the ribbon house, draped in white lace, dotted with vases overflowing with wildflowers. Women from across the country flew in to be there. Guests hugged, laughed, and shared stories of healing and courage, like sacred rituals woven together under an open sky. But this year, something was different. I didn't feel like a guest of honor. I felt whole. When it came time for my speech, I stood before them, holding Elliot's small, eager hand. He was 6 now, bold, wild, and heartbreakingly sweet. "I spent most of my life thinking my story was too quiet," I told the gathered crowd. "Too simple. Too basic." Laughter rippled gently through the air. But what I know now is this. The world is built on women like us. Women who survive. Women who rebuild. Women who hold up generations and never ask for applause. And yet, applause came anyway. As the cake was cut and the sun began to dip behind the fields, I slipped away, barefoot and smiling, to the oak tree. There was one last ribbon left to tie. Red velvet, soft but strong. On it, in shimmering silver ink, I wrote, "For every woman who thought it was too late." I knotted it carefully around the branch, then stepped back, looking up at the hundreds of ribbons now swaying and dancing above me. A forest of stories, a canopy of survival. I sat quietly on the old bench beneath the tree, the same one where I had once sat and wept. Only this time, I closed my eyes and gave thanks. Thanks for the betrayal, the silence, the fire, because all of it had led me here. And here I was not just alive. I was eternal. Eleanor McCarthy's name was no longer a footnote. It was a force. It was a lighthouse. It was a legacy. As the wind sang softly through the branches, I leaned back, laughed to myself, and whispered to the sky. I was never too basic. I was a storm in a teacup, and they just weren't ready. Now they are, and they will never, ever forget me. It was early morning when the letter arrived. Thick, cream-colored paper. No return address. Just my name, written in elegant script, the handwriting trembling slightly with age. I opened it slowly. The way you open something you know is about to shift the ground beneath your feet. Inside was a single line. "My name is Margaret. I'm your sister." I froze. No sound in the kitchen. No breeze at the window. Even the old ticking clock on the wall seemed to hold its breath. Margaret, a name I hadn't heard since I was a child. A ghost, really, whispered in hushed tones, buried deep in family silence. My mother once wept in the garden and whispered, "There are some things too heavy to speak of, Ellie." I never pushed. I never asked. And I never knew until now. I read the letter again, hands trembling. They told me you died at birth. I believed it for decades. Then I saw your name in a magazine, read about the Ribbon House. I knew. You look like Mama. You sound like me. Eleanor, I'm your twin. My knees buckled, and I sank hard onto the kitchen chair, heart pounding like 1,000 old doors flying open at once. I spent the day in a daze, pulling out family photos, studying every face, every faint resemblance, every hidden clue. How could this be true? How had it been buried so deep? Then I remembered something my father once said during one of his rare, tender moments. You were never meant to be alone. That night, I dialed the number she'd left. It rang twice. Then a voice answered, shaky, breathless, trembling. Ellie. And just like that, everything in my world realigned. She was real. She was mine. We talked for hours, sharing childhood memories, our mother's pain, the long years fate had kept us apart, and the incredible way life had finally brought us full circle. She lived her whole life in Oregon. Never married, no children, a quiet existence, always feeling like a piece of her was missing. I invited her to the farm. When she arrived, the moment was nothing short of divine. Two women, weathered and wise, standing face to face like mirrors neither knew existed. We hugged for a long time. No words, just tears, just time, healing what time had once stolen. Now, Margaret lives in the guest house by the garden. We spend our mornings in rocking chairs, trading stories we didn't know we shared. She ties ribbons, too, one for every year we lost. And the last ribbon, shimmering gold, defiant and bright, reads, "Even time can't stop the truth." I never thought I'd find new family at 72. I never thought my life would open even wider. But here we are, still becoming, still rising, still proving the best stories are the ones that refuse to end when the world says they should. And mine has only just begun again. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters,